Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to cut through the noise and get straight to the key insights from the stuff you want to understand.
That's the goal.
Today, we're looking at a whole set of Nutstuff reports you sent over. Really interesting mix.
Yeah, quite a range.
Our mission, basically, is to pull out the main threads, the big economic, geopolitical investment themes that are popping up across these analyses.
From luxury goods, believe it or not, all the way to, well, global power shifts.
Exactly. And look, these reports are dense. There's a lot in there. It can feel overwhelming.
For sure.
So we're going to try and synthesize it, pull out what's really crucial, maybe what's most intriguing.
And the overarching story, I think, that emerges from Nutstuff here is one of these big structural shifts happening globally.
Right. Creating challenges, definitely,
Yeah.
but maybe also some real opportunities if you can actually see what's going on.
Absolutely. And what I find compelling is how they connect the dots. It's not like, here's luxury, here's finance, here's geopolitics. It all weaves together.
Like the luxury market changes aren't just trends.
Exactly. They suggest something deeper about, say, brand authenticity, where things are really made.
Yeah.
And that has ripple effects, economically, even geopolitically.
Okay, well, let's jump right in there then. Luxury. The big news, or maybe surprising news, is Hermes overtaking LVMH in valuation.
Yeah, that's pretty significant. LVMH is usually the name everyone thinks of first, right? The giant.
Totally. So what's Nutstuff's take? Why the shift?
Well, the core argument in the reports boils down to brand integrity, or at least the perception of it.
Right.
They suggest Hermes is seen as really holding on to that exclusivity, that craftsmanship feel, whereas LVMH, perhaps because of its sheer scale, is maybe seen by some as diluting things a bit, more mass production maybe.
Interesting.
And Nutstuff actually makes a pretty bold prediction off the back of this. They talk about a potential broader collapse in luxury stock valuations down the line.
Really? Why?
Partly because of this issue, they call it rebranded Shenzhen goods.
Rebranded Shenzhen goods.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, the idea being that, maybe the Made in Europe label isn't always the full story. That a lot might be produced elsewhere, like China, and just finished locally.
Wow. So that raises huge questions about transparency, authenticity.
Exactly. And it suggests consumers might be starting to put a much higher premium on that perceived authenticity. Real heritage, maybe genuine scarcity.
Yeah.
If that trust fades.
Then the whole valuation model gets shaky.
Okay.
Okay. So this points to changing consumer values, maybe. What people actually want from luxury.
It really seems to put the spotlight on that, yeah. The power of the story, the trust. If that gets questioned, well, it could reshape the sector.
Okay, let's switch gears quite dramatically. Bitcoin.
Always a lively one.
Yeah, Nutstuff seems pretty focused on its performance and microstrategies too, despite all the volatility. But they frame it interestingly.
How so?
As a symptom, almost, of declining faith in traditional fiat currencies, like the dollar, the euro.
Oh, right. And they contrast it pretty sharply with gold, don't they?
They do. Which is fascinating because gold, it's got this huge $21 trillion market cap. It's the classic safe haven.
But Nutstuff is kind of questioning its modern utility, is that it?
Yeah, they seem skeptical about its relevance now. And they actually point to their own portfolio decisions, saying they're increasing exposure to crypto, directly because of worries about fiat instability.
That's the argument presented. They see Bitcoin's resilience, even with the ups and downs, as a signal, a sign of growing distrust in government money, central bank policies, a sort of decentralized hedge.
That's a strong take, especially versus gold history. Does Bitcoin's staying power, even with the craziness, surprise you in that light? Yeah. What's its signal about where money could be heading if trust keeps eroding?
Well, it certainly challenges the old ways of thinking, doesn't it? It suggests there's a real and maybe growing demand for assets outside traditional control. And if you link that to what Nutstuff also says about the U.S. dollar.
Right, the vulnerability there. De-dollarization, we hear that term a lot now. What's their analysis on the dollar's dominance? Is it fading?
They paint a pretty concerned picture, yeah. They argue its long reign as the world's reserve currency is looking increasingly shaky.
Why shaky? What's the mechanism?
They talk about this sort of no-win policy trap for the U.S. Federal Reserve.
Okay.
The idea is if the Fed raises interest rates really high to fight inflation, it risks causing chaos, maybe even a collapse, because so much global debt is in dollars.
Right. Higher rates mean higher debt payments globally.
Exactly. But if they cut rates to try and boost the economy, they risk losing credibility, maybe fueling even more inflation and weakening the dollar further.
So it's like they're stuck between a rock and a hard place.
That's the no-win scenario they describe. It highlights just how precarious things might be and why others might be looking for alternatives.
And Nutstuff thinks other countries are looking. They're not just waiting around.
That seems to be the observation. The reports mention nations are, quote, quietly dumping treasuries, selling off U.S. government debt.
And hedging.
And hedging. And things like gold, yes, but also, again, Bitcoin. And they also point to these new alliances like BRICS, potentially forming a counterweight to the dollar system.
So if these trends keep going, how worried should we actually be about the dollar's future role? Nutstuff sounds like they're raising a pretty serious flag.
It definitely prompts a big question about the stability of the whole global financial setup we've known for decades. A weaker dollar could mean more volatility, maybe a more fragmented system.
Okay, shifting again. Geopolitics, the Ukraine war. Nutstuff offers a view here that,
Right.
well, it differs quite a bit from the mainstream narrative in the West.
They do. They suggest Western powers might have, in their words, misread Putin's motives.
Misread them how? What's Nutstuff's interpretation?
Their analysis seems to frame Putin's actions less as pure expansionism and more rooted in what he sees as strategic defense needs, security concerns from his perspective.
Okay, and the implication of that view.
Is that maybe a lasting peace won't come just from escalation. It might require a different approach, multipolar talks, actual diplomatic engagement with Russia, not just around them.
That's definitely a different framing than we often hear. And it ties into their broader view on global power, right?
Exactly. They talk about needing cooperative competition rather than just trying to isolate powers. And they specifically mention China as being key to future peace and trade. It's about acknowledging a multipolar reality, essentially.
Does that perspective, that different lens on Ukraine and global power, make you rethink things? It certainly offers another angle.
It absolutely highlights how crucial it is to try and understand the motivations and perspectives of all the major players, even if you don't agree with them. Global politics is rarely black and white, is it?
No, definitely not. Okay, let's zoom in on a specific country. The UK, energy policy. Nutstuff seems quite critical here, especially about net zero.
Yes, they express some pretty strong skepticism about the UK's net zero goals, particularly given the country's reliance on energy imports right now.
What's the core criticism?
They point to what looks like a bit of a contradiction, importing a lot of energy, while perhaps not fully utilizing potential domestic resources, like, say, the North Sea.
Okay.
And they connect this to a wider theme in their reports, this idea that, quote, bad leadership and policy decisions are actually destabilizing economies.
They give examples.
Yeah, they bring up the struggles in the UK steel industry, suggesting the costs linked to net zero policies are a contributing factor. It's a case study for them of how environmental goals, even if well-intentioned,
Might have serious unintended economic consequences if not thought through carefully, affecting things like energy security or key industries.
Precisely. It highlights that need for, really holistic policymaking,
Right.
looking at all the knock-on effects.
Right. So given all these shifts, these critiques, Nutstuff isn't just pointing out problems, are they? They're suggesting ways to potentially navigate this investment-wise.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Based on this whole analysis of global shifts, resource needs, all that, they outline some quite specific investment areas they think are worth watching.
Like what kind of portfolio shifts are they suggesting?
Well, they mention macro strategies, pointing specifically to Roco's capital management. Big focus on rare earths, too.
Ah, yes. Critical minerals.
Exactly. Given China's dominance there and the push to secure supply chains outside China, they mention MP materials, ticker MP, and maybe power metallics, PNPN in Canada, as having a rare earths angle.
Makes sense. What else is on the investment radar?
Uranium's a big one, driven by the renewed interest in nuclear power globally.
All right, for energy security and lower emissions.
Yeah. They specifically talk about HALEU, that's high-assay, low-enriched uranium, which next-gen reactors need, and companies working on rebuilding domestic enrichment, like General Matter, ASPI, Lightbridge Ticker, LTBR.
Okay, so macro, rare earths, uranium.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Digital assets get a mention, specifically Block, SQ, which they see as a real BTC-aligned business, and also Helium, HNT, which they think might be undervalued because of its network potential within the Solana ecosystem.
Interesting. Any specific regions or other sectors?
They flag Indian equities as interesting, suggesting looking at CLSA research for guidance there. Back in the UK, they see potential value in plays like Kistos, Kist on the London Exchange, an oil and gas company they view as undervalued.
Okay.
Also Sprott, SII as a sort of proxy for money flowing into uranium and precious metals ETFs. And one biotech pick, Cardiol, CRDL in the US, apparently due to strong phase 3 potential for a heart drug.
So the overall theme seems to be investing in strategic resources, maybe alternative financial systems, finding value where others aren't looking, all tied back to these big shifts we discussed.
That's exactly it. Positioning for what they see as the big, unfolding structural trends.
Now, it's pretty clear reading these reports that Nutstuff isn't exactly thrilled with current political and economic leadership in various places.
No, that's putting it mildly. There's a definite sense of frustration, even exasperation running through the commentary.
Or what specifically?
It's broad. They critique Trump's trade policies, seeing his tariff withdrawals as weakness. They hit the UK's net zero approach again, calling it economically damaging.
Any other specific mentions?
Yeah, there's some skepticism about Trump's grasp of certain economic issues, like higher education funding or the trade balance. They even weave in a warning from Ray Dalio about the danger of an undereducated public holding back productivity.
So it sounds like a pretty wide-ranging critique of leadership effectiveness or lack thereof.
The core concern seems to be that these perceived failures, these policy missteps, are actively making global instability worse and just hindering sensible economic management.
Okay. And staying with that theme of things, maybe not being quite as they seem.
Yeah.
The point about luxury goods manufacturing, the made in Europe labels.
Ah, yes, the rebranded Shenzhen goods idea again.
What's the actual claim there? Sounds pretty explosive.
Well, the assertion in the reports is pretty stark, that a significant chunk of goods labeled made in Italy or made in France, or actually, mostly made in China, and they're just finished off, or maybe just have the label put on in Europe.
Wow. That really cuts against the whole image, doesn't it? The artisanal craftsmanship narrative.
Absolutely. And that stuff suggests this raises serious questions about what you're really paying for, the actual value, the authenticity.
And the implication is, if people catch on,
It could seriously damage brand loyalty, consumer trust, the whole premium pricing model.
definitely makes you think twice about that price tag. Does knowing that possibility change how you view those brands?
It certainly complicates the picture, doesn't it? It makes you question what luxury even means in a globalized world like this. What are the real inputs versus the brand story?
Okay, finally, the reports also seem to take aim at the world of market analysis itself. All the noise.
Yeah, there's a real pushback against complexity for complexity's sake, it seems.
What's their advice instead?
They call for simplification, focus on value, focus on key drivers like currency flows, cut through the jargon and the often contradictory punditry.
Any concrete strategy suggestions?
They mention one idea: sell U.S. stocks that are losing momentum, buy European ones that are gaining, and crucially, don't try and time the bottom on those big crowded tech names.
And they see market signals supporting this kind of potential shift away from U.S. tech dominance.
Seems so. They highlight things like the Russell 2000 small cap index hitting a new relative low against the S&P 500, the lowest since like 1999, and even the big MAG7 stocks showing relative weakness.
Right.
And they double down on their skepticism about the valuations of giants like Apple and Nvidia, suggesting they might be, quite vulnerable to a correction.
So the core message is ignore the hype, look at fundamentals, look at value, don't chase what's potentially already peaked.
Pretty much. It's a call for discipline, really. Yeah. Base decisions on solid analysis, not just noise or the latest narrative.
It feels like beyond just the markets and geopolitics, these Nutstuff reports are also hinting at some deeper societal stuff.
Yes, absolutely. You can definitely pick up on these broader undercurrents.
Like what themes stand out?
Well, there's concern about eroding trust in leaders and institutions. There's a sense of growing fragility and social cohesion in some places, even worries about demographics and what that means for future governance. Yeah. And then they reflect on values, too. Things like honor, leadership quality, legacy, ending with a call for basically better, more value-driven leadership globally.
It's quite sobering, isn't it, how these big economic and political shifts seem so deeply connected to these fundamental questions of trust and values. It makes you wonder, what role do those values play in navigating all this complexity, personally, globally?
That really feels like the fundamental question they leave hanging, doesn't it? That maybe the solutions we need aren't just technical or strategic, but also require, a renewed focus on basic principles in how we lead and make decisions.
Well, this has been a really packed, deep dive into these Nutstuff reports. We've covered a lot of ground.
We certainly have.
From luxury brands and Bitcoin's persistence to the dollar's potential issues, the different takes on geopolitics, the energy policy critiques.
And those specific investment ideas flowing from that analysis.
Right. It's clear Nutstuff sees a world in, well, pretty significant flux, with lots of interconnected changes happening.
Absolutely. And their core point seems to be that actually understanding these underlying shifts, these tectonic plate movements, is crucial for navigating what's coming. It gives you perspective.
So a final thought maybe for our listeners. With all this talk of global shifts in the economy and geopolitics, what assumptions that you held are maybe being challenged now after hearing this? And what new areas might you want to dig into yourself?
Definitely plenty to think about.
Hopefully this deep dive gave everyone a good starting point for their own further exploration.
Disclaimer. North Breach Limited, Nutstuff trading name, is an appointed representative of Messels Limited, which is authorized and regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority. Nutstuff has made every reasonable effort to ensure the information provided in this communication is correct. But Nutstuff makes no representation nor any warranty as to whether the information is accurate, complete, or up to date. To the extent permitted by law, Nutstuff accepts no responsibility for any errors or misstatements, negligent or otherwise. Nutstuff, its associates, officers, or employees may also have interests in the financial instruments referred to in this information by acting in various roles. The information in this media is confidential. If you are not the intended recipient, you are not authorized to use the information in this media in any way. Nutstuff does not guarantee the integrity of any media or attached files. The view or opinions expressed are the author's own and may not reflect the view or opinions of Nutstuff. Electronic communications carried within the Nutstuff system may be monitored.